Respected dignitaries, distinguished guests, dear teachers and students. It's a matter of great pleasure for me to be part of this national e-conference on challenges in multidisciplinary science education and research, a present scenario organized by Ramaiah College of Arts, Science and Commerce, Bangalore. Whether we talk about the research in the pure science or research in social science, behavioral science or management, the basic step and the very core step, the first step of the research remains the same, that is identifying the research problem. What makes a research in the science domain different from that of research in the management is the methodology being used. Otherwise, the research problem which has to be identified, that is the basic point from where the research starts. Identifying the research problem is the core step. It is the main step, the first step in the research process. Whether we talk about research in science, pure science, or behavioral science. Every researcher has to identify the research problem, that is, he has to be confident about the research problem, the research question. And the question is, from where to get this research problem or the research question. The research problem or the research question we cannot get from the literature review. The literature review tells us about the gap in the literature. It talks about the extent literature being carried on a particular topic. But what is the research problem? What motivates you to start thinking on a particular direction? That depends upon your environment. That depends upon the surroundings. That depends upon the situation. In the management research, we emphasize more on the changes in the market environment. We focus on the scenario which prevails in the market. However, in sciences, because the research is being carried on in a controlled environment, but the research problem has to germinate from the surroundings. The scholars, they have to think deeper into the research question. It can be a continuity in the research work which provides a clue for the research problem. So continuity in the research work means because already a cause and effect relationship has been established, so that the limitation in the previous research work, it provides the research question which can be probed by them in the future. So research question or the research problem has to be identified, whichever domain, whichever discipline we talk about. So the research problem is nothing but stating a research question or maybe a statement wherein we talk about why this situation has happened, why there is a change in the market needs, why the environment has changed. So when we try to find out the changes in the market needs, when we try to find out the changes in the behavior of the individuals, we dig deeper into the research problem. So the research problem, for most of the domains, the research problem comes from the observations which we make. It comes from the readings of the newspapers, comes from the readings of the magazines, or maybe some committee report. I mean to say, from the secondary data. The research problem has to be identified by everybody, whosoever is doing the research. Otherwise, the research becomes meaningless. In order to make the research meaningful, the research problem identified by the researcher provides a useful direction to start pursuing the research work. In Indian context, most of the time, it has been observed that the researchers, they state the research objective and later on they try to identify the problem. This is what we call the reverse engineering. It has to be other way around. First, the research problem has to be identified and then you have to state the research objectives. Research problem provides a rationale for writing a paper, for pursuing a research work. It provides the motivation. It justifies that what convinces a researcher to start thinking in a particular direction. So the research, whether we talk about the research in science, behavioral science, social science or management research, in every research, if you want to make the research more scientific, if you want that the research should ultimately come out with very conclusive results, the most meaningful results, in that case, the research has to be very meaningful, and in that case, research must identify the problem. Now, when we talk about research problem or the research question, it is the why. Why am I doing this work? Why should come first in the research process, followed by how, what, when and where. Out of these 5 questions, if a scholar, if a researcher is able to identify the why am I thinking on these lines? Why should I write a research paper? Why should I pursue a research work? That motivation has to be there to start working on a particular research topic. So from last almost 25 years of research experience has made me to realize that whichever discipline you talk about, whichever domain you are in, when we talk about publication in the quality journals, the very first section of the paper takes away most of our energies. That is the most difficult section to write. Trust me, more than 60% of our thoughts, of our ideas, they go in writing the introduction of the paper. That is the most difficult section of the paper. Based on the reviews of various papers sent for publication in the quality journals, I can share with you there's the editor or the associate editor, even the assistant editor. They would not forward your paper for review. They would outrightly reject the paper if the introduction is not convincing. It means introduction tells about the story. It talks about the rationale. It talks about the motivation. It spells out the conviction that why a researcher has thought of writing a research paper. So the quality journals, even in the science domain, I'm sure introduction section of the paper is the one which requires more efforts as compared to the other sections of the paper. Because the most difficult part to do research, to pursue the research, is to think about why. The rest of the questions, starting with what, how, when, where, they can be handled by the researchers. They can be managed by the researchers. But if there is no convincing research question, you cannot sell your idea. Your paper would be rejected. The acceptance of the paper. Before acceptance, sending out the paper for review to the various reviewers is totally dependent on the introduction section which we have written. These editors, associate editors, they do not have the time to go through the entire paper. They simply read the introduction of your paper and then they take a decision. It has to be a text rejection or it has to be sent out for the review. So if you want to become a fortunate researcher, that your paper should go out for review, devote maximum time towards writing the introduction of the paper. Why I am saying so? It is because this is the most difficult, though critical and crucial, but this is the most difficult part of the paper. Because two things are very important here. One is the identification of the problem, which consumes most of your thoughts. Once you are confident about the research problem and the research question, the equally important aspect of introduction is identifying the research gap. In order to identify the research gap, everybody would agree with me that unless and until you review the extant literature, unless you are confident that you have thoroughly reviewed the pertinent literature, research gap cannot be identified. Even if you miss out one single paper, that can bring disaster because your entire paper can be washed out. So what is important here is, for the introduction, when I say it's very important, but it is very critical as well. If you are able to identify the research problem, you have to identify the research gap as well. So, research gap talks about reviewing 50, 100, 150 papers in the quality journals. If the literature review is incomplete, or if you are not able to review all the papers that have appeared in the quality journals, you shall not be able to identify the research gap. So there has to be a proper balance between identifying the research problem and identifying the research gap. Identification of the research gap is equally important, but in the introduction, the first two sections, they are devoted towards the identifying the research problem. Once you have identified the research problem, then we start thinking on those lines and start reviewing the literature. Only after reviewing all the papers that are related to your research work, then only we are able to defend that this is the research gap. We are able to state the research gap. Research gap then helps the researcher to be confident about two things. One is the problem persists. Problem is there. It exists. At the same time, the researchers, they have also acknowledged that such type of work is actually demanded. It is actually required. And no such work has been done in the past. Research gap, when we say research gap or reviewing the literature, that provides a confidence to the researcher that no similar work has been done by the researchers in the previous years. So both the things are equally important. One is the conviction of a researcher that this problem has to be undertaken, that there is a problem that exists, and in order to confirm that this problem has never been identified in the past, so for that, the confirmation of the research problem which we have in hand, in order to confirm that research problem, we have to review the literature. So systematic review of the literature that provides a confidence, the assurance to the researcher that such type of work has not been done in the past. That confirms that the research problem in hand is the most relevant problem to be tackled. That is the most relevant research question that has to be addressed. Now talking about the present scenario, that is COVID-19. No doubt, everybody has suffered on one account or the other account. But the researchers, they got sufficient time to go through the literature. They have ample time to think about the research problem. They have sufficient time to review the literature or to discuss it thoroughly with the other researchers. The COVID situation has restricted the movement, as a result of which the researchers in the science domain, they might have faced the problem of having an access to their lab, conducting the experiment. But this is the time when you can read a lot. This is the time when you can discuss a lot. This is the time when you can actually sow the seeds for your paper, when you can think aloud, when you can write a lot, and when nobody is there and you do not have any fixed working hours, which sometimes they come as an obstacle in your thinking process. You have sufficient time to discuss through various, using any online platform. You have sufficient time to download the papers and to go through those papers. The most difficult part, I said, it is to identify the problem and to identify the research gap. Trust me, identification of the problem and identification of the research gap equally require time, sufficient time. Rest of the things can be managed by the researcher. But in order to identify the problem, you need to have sufficient time to think through the problem. In order to identify the research gap, you have to read a lot. You have to read number of papers. Then only you can provide a confirmation to your research problem. When the research gap provides proper support to the research problem in hand, then a researcher can state the research objectives. In case of the management research, we get sufficient clues, sufficient ideas from various magazines or the reports of various committees, reports of various agencies also, which are freely available on the internet. So we get sufficient ideas from such type of reports, and we tend to get some problem which is there in the report. Even the committee reports, they provide the grounds for identifying the problem. This COVID situation has disturbed our normal lives. But we have to think positively. We have to be optimistic. And we have to, above all these things, we have to become more productive. Every hour which we spend, that has to be meaningful. As a researcher, whichever discipline or domain you belong to, as a researcher, nobody can stop us thinking about the various problems. If there is no normal routine for us, we can always think about various problems. That requires lots of reading. The basic problem which I have seen when we talk about social science research, behavioral research, even in the management discipline also, Indians do not have quality publications to their credit. Where are we lacking? Where are we lacking? Why is it so that we cannot publish? I'm talking about the quality journals. Why we do not have quality publications? Except for very few prestigious institutes in our country, most of the universities or the colleges, you would find that we have failed to get quality publications. And the basic reason behind such a failure is we do not try to pursue a scientific research. When I say scientific research, it means we are not questioning ourselves at various steps. We are not providing proper answer to why. This research has more or less become a business for us. As a supervisor, we are guiding many scholars. As a scholar, students are getting scholarship, because of which there is a mushroom growth in pursuing PhD. So we are sacrificing quality at the cost of quantity. We believe in supervising large number of students. Trust me, out of your 10 scholars, you would hardly find 1 or 2 scholars they are pursuing serious research. All the scholars, most of the scholars, they are looking for the shortcuts to get the PhD degree. Which means, if you are not a serious scholar, you cannot identify a problem. You ask any PhD student about the research problem. What is the research problem, or what is the research question? Out of 10, only one would be confident in defending the research problem he has identified. Rest of the students, they can state the research objectives. They can talk about the hypothesis. But they do not know what motivated them to pursue research. What is the research question? Which question has bothered them? If you do not have a research problem, if you do not have a research question, what are you looking for? What are you researching upon? Research question is difficult to identify, and that is why nobody is applying the mind. Nobody is reading. The biggest loophole which I have found in today's researchers is lack of reading habit. They do not want to read. But if you do not read, simple experiments or data collection from the market with the help of the survey instrument would not provide you with the desired results. Students, they are happy. They are happy to learn about the techniques by using various softwares. Students, they want to learn. But in many Vivavos, I have myself observed that if a question is posed to them, that why have you used this technique, they fail to defend it. Why have you used large number of techniques? They do not have an answer to it. If a simple technique can provide an answer to your research question, why have you used multivariate techniques? The researchers in India, I am talking about the PhD students, they believe that if they would use the multivariate techniques, their paper would get published. Trust me, nobody is interested in your techniques. These statistical techniques, they help you to simply analyze the data. So the research work which is carried on by the scientists in their labs, that provides a solution to the problem. They are trying to find out the effect of the cause. What is the effect of the cause? But if you have not identified the cause, whose effect are you looking for? If you are looking for the relationship between the two variables, what is the cause? If the management researchers, they would try to identify cause and effect relationship, their research would become more scientific. If in each step they would try addressing why, an answer to why am I doing this? Why identification of the problem is important? Why literature review is important? It is required. Why I am pursuing this research? Why a particular sampling technique is relevant? Why this statistical technique has to be used? On what basis I am setting up these hypotheses? then the research would become more scientific. When I say scientific, it means the findings of your study can be generalized to the similar sectors. It is not that we do not have minds. Only thing is we do not apply our minds, and research requires presence of mind. It requires thinking process. It requires continuous thinking. It talks about idea generation. It talks about discussion, a thorough discussion. It talks about your internal motivation. When I say internal motivation, so internal motivation talks about your competence, it talks about your relatedness, it also talks about your autonomy. It also talks about your autonomy, which means the self-determination of a researcher. Self-determination of a researcher. And in the management literature, the self-determination theory basically comprises of these three dimensions. One is competence, second is relatedness, and third is autonomy, which means self-determination would come when you feel that you are competent to do this work, when you are able to connect your problem with the previous problems, and when you feel that you are free to express your ideas, your views, you have that autonomy in your mind to think freely. So whether we talk about the management research or research in science, self-determination is very much required. Somewhat related to this is the psychological capital of the researcher. When I say psychological capital of the researcher, it comprises of 4 dimensions. One is the hope. What should be the hope for a researcher? The hope for the researcher should be to produce quality work. I am hopeful of publishing in the elite journal, A-star journal. Second important dimension of psychological capital is optimistic. You have to remain positive. Yes, I can do this. What come may, whether it is COVID-19 situation or any other epidemic, any natural disaster, I shall keep reading. I shall keep probing. I shall keep thinking. That is your optimistic nature. Third dimension is resilience. Because we are talking about COVID-19 situation, resilience. We do feel bad about the situation which is prevailing right now. But how quickly we recover from this situation, how quickly we come to the normal situation, that also depends on us. Everybody is disturbed, but few among us, they are able to recover very soon because they have engrossed themselves in the research. Because the research is, they are totally embedded in the research work. They are seriously, they have seeped themselves in the research. So they are able to optimally utilize the time to do productive research. Research keeps you engaged. Research keeps your mind active. So you are able to recover. So this is the third dimension of psychological capital, that is resilience. What is your rate of recovery? fourth dimension of psychological capital is self-efficacy. To what extent we are confident about our actions, about our attitudes and behaviors. To what extent we are self-effective. Which again means utilizing the time most productively, so that later on we do not repent upon wasting our months. This COVID situation may continue for few more months. Still, we need to think about utilizing our time, what best we can give. As a researcher, what best we can give. We have the time to write quality papers. Post-COVID-19 situation, the scientists, they can easily approach their lab and they can look into the results. But this is the right time when through reading we can identify the problem and we can read the literature. This literature review would enrich your psychological capital. Your self-determination would help you in identifying the research problem. How much competent you are. How are you able to relate the research problem with the gap in the literature? And how freely you think. That is the self-determination of a researcher. And how much rich you are when we talk about the psychological capital, which means how much hopeful, optimistic, resilient and self-efficacy and self-effectiveness of an individual, of a researcher. So all these components of the psychological capital also helps the researchers to keep going, to make the research a continuous process. When we teach a course, so within a time frame, the deadline which is provided to us, we follow the timetable and we finish off with our teaching. But research never ends up. Research keeps going. It's a continuous process. As long as a teacher is able to think through the problem, is able to apply his mind, is able to look into the surroundings, is able to relate the situations, the researcher in him would never die. A teacher can retire from his job. A researcher never retires. A researcher is always remembered by the generations only when we are contributing significantly towards the literature. If we are building a theory, if we are contributing something meaningful to the existing literature, to the existing body of knowledge. A researcher always remains alive through his or her writings. At least we can try to publish our papers in the quality journals. And this can be made possible only when we identify the research problem. Trust me, when we talk about the behavioral research, the research in management domain, because marketing is very dynamic. environment keeps changing. Situations never remain static. We have abundant of ideas to research upon, because the attitude, the perceptions, the intentions, the behavior of the people keep changing. So analyzing the factors which has caused that change, that keeps the research going. When we talk about the advancements in the medical science, even after a gap of 6 months, we have not come out with a vaccine for this coronavirus. Doctors are not confident about the results of this vaccine. Which means there's lots and lots of scope for doing research in every domain. In every domain we talk about. Any domain you talk about. There's ample of opportunities to do quality research. Only thing is, we should have a passion for it. Research requires serious passion. It requires sincere dedication, persistence. The seriousness on the part of the researcher, sincerity on the part of the researcher, his dedication would help him to accomplish success in getting quality publications. Trust me, it's not that difficult. Your determination is required. Reinforcement is required. Everybody can do it. People sitting in the US, UK, Australia, Canada, if they can publish, even in China, if they can publish quality papers in elite journals, why can't we? We can also do it. Indian brains are much sharper than brains in other countries. What is lacking in us is dedication and sincerity. We all have to work together for thinking about the real cause, for thinking seriously about the present situation. And the present COVID-19 situation has provided us with many opportunities to pursue research in the coming years. Any domain, there is lots of scope for almost every researcher to identify the problem and to provide a solution to it. With this, I again thank the Ramaiah College of Arts, Science and Commerce for providing me this opportunity to share my own experiences with you all. You must be wondering that this is a conference targeting the researchers in the science domain, and I am from the management background. Trust me, the first few steps in the research remain the same for everybody. And the very first step is common for all, which is identification of the problem. Rest of the steps might differ. First step is the same. If you are able to identify the problem, Nobody can stop you from publishing in the elite journals. Thank you once again for your patient hearing. I would thank the college again for providing me this opportunity. Stay home, stay safe. Thank you very much.